The first cut was the hardest. The shovel, its iron edge sharpened by her father's own hand years ago, bit into the dense sod of the hillside. A thick mat of grass and roots resisted, clinging to the earth with the tenacity of a living thing that knew it was being killed. Ilara put her weight onto the shovel's shoulder, her worn leather boot pressing down until something gave with a dull, tearing sound. She lifted the first clod, heavy and dark with moisture, and tossed it aside. One spadeful. She looked at the small, dark wound she had made in the green hill behind the cabin. It looked insignificant, almost comical. Beside her, Boro, a dog the color of winter twilight, watched with eyes that seemed to understand the scale of the task ahead. He gave a low sigh, his great head resting on his paws, and settled in for a long wait. This was his nature, to witness, to wait, to be present. The town of Hemlock's Ford saw the pile of dirt begin to grow. At first it was a simple curiosity. "What's the orphan girl up to now?" they'd ask each other over the fences or in the general store. The loss of her parents the previous winter to the fever had left her isolated, a quiet, self-contained thing in the small cabin her father had built at the valley's edge. They expected her to sell the land, to move to the city where she had distant relatives. Instead, she began to dig. Mr. Hemlock was the first to approach her directly. He was a man whose knuckles were permanently swollen from a lifetime of farm work, his skin a roadmap of sun and wind. He stood at the edge of her property, arms crossed over his barrel chest, and watched her push a wheelbarrow laden with rock and clay. "That's a mighty big hole for a root cellar, Ilara," he called out, his voice thick with unearned authority. Ilara paused, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow with the back of a dirty forearm. "It's not a root cellar," she said. Her voice was quiet, unused to conversation. "Oh?" He squinted at the dark maw she had already carved into the hill, a tunnel now deep enough to swallow her to her shoulders. "Going to bury a treasure, are you? Or just digging for the sake of it? Grief does strange things to a person." "I have a plan," she said, and that was all. She gripped the handles of the wheelbarrow and pushed it towards the growing mound of earth that was becoming a landmark in its own right. Mr. Hemlock watched her go, shaking his head. He turned to Boro, who hadn't moved. "You tell her that hill's going to come down on her head the first good rain we get." Boro merely blinked his slow, intelligent eyes. Weeks turned into months. The sun of summer beat down, baking the clay she excavated into hard, cracked plates. The pile of earth grew enormous. Ilara's hands, soft at the start, blistered, then bled, then hardened into calloused tools. Her back ached with a fire that never quite went out, a constant companion to her labor. She worked from the first light of dawn until the last rays faded behind the western ridge, stopping only to eat a simple meal of bread and dried meat, sharing a portion with Boro. Every night she would light a single candle in the cabin and open her parents' journals. They were not diaries of emotion, but records of observation. Her father, an engineer from a city far away, and her mother, a naturalist who understood the language of stone and season, had filled the pages with diagrams, calculations, and theories. They had studied the geology of this valley, the patterns of the wind, the history of its winters written in the rings of ancient trees. They had designed a shelter, a burrow, a place that did not fight the cold, but used the earth itself as an insurmountable shield against it. On the pages were drawings of ventilation shafts angled to catch the prevailing wind, of a chimney system that created a powerful, self-cleaning draft, of load-bearing timbers set in a way that distributed the immense pressure of the earth above. It was all there. Her inheritance was not the small cabin or the few acres of land. It was this knowledge. Her work was not an act of grief, but an act of faith. Mrs. Gable came by on a Sunday, carrying a still warm apple pie. She was a kind woman whose kindness often manifested as intrusion. She found Ilara at the entrance to the tunnel, her face and clothes smeared with dirt, her hair tied back in a messy knot. "Child," Mrs. Gable said, her voice laced with pity, "you can't go on like this. The whole town is worried. You're thin as a rail. This digging, it's not healthy." "I'm strong," Ilara replied, looking not at the woman but at the pie. She was hungry. "Of course you are, dear, but this obsession—" "Mayor Thompson says it's an eyesore. He says if you're not careful, you'll cause a landslide." "It won't slide," Ilara said, her eyes tracing the lines of the strata she had exposed in the earth. She knew this hill now, its layers of clay, gravel, and solid rock, as intimately as she knew the lines on her own hand. Her father's notes had predicted every one. "Please, Ilara, stop this. Come to church. Let us help you." "This is my home," she said, gesturing to the hole, the cabin, the land. She accepted the pie with a quiet thank you, and Mrs. Gable left, her mission of mercy a failure, feeling more troubled than when she had arrived. Ilara and Boro shared the pie, sitting on the ground as the sun set, the sweet apples a luxury in their Spartan life. The first winter came. The ground froze solid, and the digging had to stop. "See," Mr. Hemlock said to his cronies at the store. "Told you the freeze would put an end to that foolishness." But Ilara did not stop working. She had spent the autumn felling trees on the far side of her property, and now she spent the winter shaping them. With an adze, a saw, and a draw knife, she hewed massive timbers for the support structure. The rhythmic thud of her work echoed across the snow-covered valley. Each beam was cut and notched with painstaking precision according to the diagrams in the journals. She worked in the lee of the cabin, Boro a dark shape curled on a pile of wood shavings, his fur frosted with his own breath. Her arms and shoulders, already strong from digging, grew corded with new muscle. It was during that first winter that Leo started visiting. He was the blacksmith's son, a young man with quiet hands and an observant gaze. He didn't come with advice or pity. He came with a newly sharpened axe head, or a handful of forged nails he said were extras. He would watch her work, not with the judgment of the other townsfolk, but with a genuine, almost technical curiosity. "That's a mortise and tenon joint," he said one afternoon, watching her fit two massive beams together. "My father uses that for wagon frames. Never seen it used for this." "It's strong," Ilara said, not pausing in her work. "Strongest there is," he agreed. He looked at the gaping hole in the hill, then back at the complex joinery in her hands. "You really do have a plan, don't you?" "Yes," she said. He didn't ask what it was. He just nodded, and after a while, he picked up a spare adze and began stripping bark from the next log in the pile. He worked with a steady, easy rhythm, and Boro, who was suspicious of most people, eventually uncurled himself and rested his head on Leo's boot. They worked in silence, the only sounds the scrape of steel on wood and the crisp air moving through the pines. When spring arrived, the digging resumed. With Leo's occasional help, the timber framework began to rise inside the excavated chambers. It was a skeleton of immense strength, a cage of wood designed to hold up a mountain. She was no longer just digging a hole. She was building a structure within the earth. The main chamber was 20 feet wide and 30 feet long, the ceiling a soaring arch of interlocked beams. Off this main room, she carved smaller alcoves, a pantry, a sleeping area, a small workshop. The second year was the year of systems. She spent a month digging the ventilation shaft, a narrow 2-foot-wide tunnel that snaked 60 feet upwards through the earth to a disguised opening high on the hill. It was the most dangerous part of the work, a claustrophobic crawl through darkness, hauling out dirt one bucket at a time. The journals claimed this shaft would create a natural draft, pulling fresh air through the dwelling and drawing smoke from the hearth with incredible efficiency. She built the hearth and chimney next, a masterpiece of dry-stacked stone and clay mortar. It was set against the deepest wall of the main chamber, its flue designed with a specific bend and a wide throat, another detail from her father's drawings, meant to prevent downdrafts and snow blockage. The townsfolk saw the pile of stones she gathered from the riverbed, the endless mixing of clay and sand. Their mockery took on a new tone, one of resigned amusement. She was the town eccentric, the hill witch, a harmless creature of dirt and obsession. The children sometimes dared each other to run to the edge of her property and shout, "Crazy Ilara!" before running away, laughing. Ilara never seemed to notice. Her world had shrunk to the hill, the journals, the scent of damp earth, and the solid presence of Boro at her side. Leo continued to visit. He brought her a new wheel for her barrow when the old one split. He helped her hoist the heaviest ceiling beams into place using a system of levers and ropes. He never stayed long, and he never asked for anything. He would simply appear, help with the task at hand, and then leave with a quiet nod. One evening, as they sat sharing a piece of hardtack, he looked at the nearly finished interior, the smooth, packed earth walls and the mighty timber frame. "It feels safe in here," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the chamber. "It will be," she said. The third year was for finishing and fortification. She built the door, a behemoth of oak planks, cross-braced with hand-forged iron straps Leo had made for her. It was set 4 feet deep into the tunnel entrance, creating an antechamber, a cold sink to trap the winter air before it could touch the inner door. She spent the autumn stocking the pantry she had carved into the cold earth. Shelves were filled with jars of preserved vegetables from her small garden, sacks of flour and beans, dried meats, and rounds of hard cheese. The final and most arduous task was firewood. For months, she and Leo, who now came more often than not, cut and split wood, hauling it not to a wood pile outside the cabin, but directly into the shelter. They stacked it along an entire wall of the main chamber, a dense, fragrant wall of fuel that reached the ceiling. 50 cords of oak, pine, and birch, an impossible amount of wood, a lifetime supply for a normal cabin. "The whole town saying you're expecting the world to end," Leo remarked one afternoon, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Ilara paused, leaning on her own axe. She looked at the sky, a crisp, pale blue. "The world doesn't have to end for the winter to kill you," she said. By the beginning of the third winter, it was done. The great mound of excavated earth had been smoothed and seeded with grass, and it was already disappearing back into the hill. The heavy outer door was hung, fitting so snugly into its frame that not a sliver of light could pass through. The chimney was capped with a stone cowl. From the outside, her father's cabin looked the same as it always had, small and solitary at the foot of the hill. There was almost no sign of the 3 years of relentless labor, save for a faint path leading to a heavy oak door that seemed to open into nothing but a wall of earth. The town had mostly forgotten her. She was a fixture, a part of the landscape, her folly now complete and, therefore, uninteresting. Mr. Hemlock saw her one day in the store, buying salt and lamp oil. "Finished your burrow, have you?" he asked, a smirk on his face. "Just in time to hibernate. Wait until the damp sets in. You'll be sick of it in a week." Ilara just looked at him. "It's dry," she said, and walked out. The signs began subtly. The squirrels were frantic, burying every nut and seed they could find. The migrating geese flew south weeks earlier than usual, their formations tight and urgent. The autumn was unnaturally still and cold, the air holding a strange, metallic clarity. Elara felt it in her bones, a deep thrumming that resonated with the warnings in her mother's journals about 100-year weather patterns. She made her final preparations, checking the seals on the door, topping off her water cistern, bringing the last of her garden's harvest inside. She brought Boro's thick straw bed into the main chamber and placed it near the stone hearth. The snow began on a Tuesday. It was not the gentle, drifting snow of a normal winter's day, but small, hard pellets, like sand, driven by a wind that moaned from the north. By evening, the wind was screaming. It was a physical presence, a solid wall of force that slammed against the little cabin. Elara sat inside her shelter, the inner door barred, a fire blazing in the hearth. The chimney drew perfectly, pulling the smoke up and away with a soft roar. The stone and earth around her muffled the sound of the storm to a distant, hollow hum. It was warm. It was quiet. It was safe. Boro lay by the fire, his tail giving a lazy thump against the packed earth floor. He was utterly content. Elara ran a hand over his thick fur, the steady rhythm of his breathing a comfort in the subterranean silence. She thought of the people in the town, in their wooden houses with the wind shrieking through the walls, and felt not pride, but a quiet, somber certainty. She had listened to the wisdom of the dead, and it had brought her here. For 3 days, the world outside ceased to exist. The snow was relentless, piling in monstrous drifts, burying fences and sheds, climbing the walls of houses. The wind never stopped, its voice a constant high-pitched shriek that drove the snow into every crack and crevice. It was a blizzard of a scale no one living had ever seen. Roofs began to creak and groan under the impossible weight. Firewood piles were buried, windows shattered from the pressure. The cold was a predator, seeping through the walls, killing the fires on the hearths. On the 3rd day, Elara heard it. A faint, desperate pounding. It was not at the cabin door, which she knew must be buried under 20 feet of snow, but at the heavy oak door to the shelter. Boro lifted his head, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Elara quieted him with a touch. She listened. The pounding came again, frantic and muffled. She unbarred the heavy inner door and walked through the short, cold antechamber. Unlatching the thick iron bolt on the outer door, she pulled it inward. A blast of wind and stinging snow shot into the tunnel. A figure, completely covered in white, stumbled in and collapsed onto the floor. It was Leo. His face was pale with exhaustion, his lips blue. He was covered in ice. "Elara," he gasped, his voice a raw whisper. "The roof. The blacksmith shop. It came down. My father's leg is broken. We're in the store, but the roof there is cracking. People are freezing." She helped him to his feet and brought him inside, barring the door again against the storm. She gave him a blanket and a mug of hot broth from the pot simmering over the fire. He drank it greedily, his hands shaking. "How?" he asked, looking around the warm, well-lit cavern. "How is it so calm in here?" "My parents had a plan," she said. "We need help," he said, his eyes pleading. "There's nowhere else to go. The church roof is gone. Hemlock's barn collapsed. He lost all his animals." Elara looked at the vast, empty space of the main chamber, at the mountain of firewood, at the shelves laden with food. She had built this for herself, a sanctuary for one. But her father's journals had not just been about engineering, they had been about community, about how a single strong point could save a whole network. She gave Leo a determined nod. "Bring them," she said. It took hours. Leo, fortified by the warmth and food, led the way. They tunneled out from Alara's door, a desperate, exhausting effort against the crushing weight of the snow. When they broke through, the landscape was unrecognizable. It was a white desert, the wind sculpting the snow into waves and cliffs. There were no roads, no fences, only the tops of a few roofs and chimneys poking through. They brought Leo's family first. His father carried on a makeshift stretcher, his face tight with pain. Then they went back for more. Mr. Hemlock was the next to arrive. His legendary self-sufficiency had been shattered. His face was gray with shock, his hands wrapped in rags against frostbite. He stepped into the warmth of the shelter and his jaw went slack. He stared at the arched timber ceiling, the perfectly drawing chimney, the sheer, solid reality of it all. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a dawning, painful understanding. He didn't speak. He just found a place along the wall and sank to the floor, his head in his hands. Mrs. Gable came with a group of women and children, their faces pinched and terrified. She saw Alara directing the newcomers, finding them space, handing out blankets. Her expression of pity was replaced by one of pure, unadulterated awe. "Oh, child," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, you clever, clever child." Finally, Mayor Thompson arrived, his fine wool coat torn, his face a mask of humbled desperation. He, who had called her project an eyesore, who had threatened to have it filled in, now stood at the entrance to her salvation. He took in the scene, 30, then 40, then nearly 50 people finding refuge in the folly he had mocked. The air was warm, smelling of wood smoke and damp wool. A quiet order was taking hold as Alara moved among the people, her voice calm and steady. She showed them the ventilation system, the cistern with its clean water, the vast stores of food. The mayor approached her, his posture stooped. He stood before her for a long moment, the leader of the town, defeated by a force of nature that a lone girl had prepared for. "Alara," he said, his voice hoarse, I was wrong. I am sorry. You saved us. You saved all of us." Alara looked at the faces around her, huddled in the warm glow of the fire. She saw fear, but also a glimmer of hope. She saw her community, stripped of all its pride and prejudice, reduced to the simple human need for shelter. She had not built this place for them, but now they were here, and they were safe. "The storm will pass," she said. It was not a boast, it was a fact. A simple, declarative statement in the heart of the hill. The storm raged for 4 more days. In that time, the shelter became a microcosm of the town. Leo, his own family settled, became Alara's quiet lieutenant, organizing rations and tending to the injured. Mr. Hemlock, his initial shock wearing off, used his practical skills to reinforce a section of the entrance tunnel that was taking on too much snow load, his movements deferential, his eyes constantly seeking Alara's approval. Mrs. Gable organized the women, caring for the children and portioning out the food from Alara's pantry with a reverence usually reserved for communion wafers. The social order of Hemlock's Ford was inverted. The quiet orphan was now their anchor, her patient labor the only thing standing between them and a frozen death. The journals, once her private inheritance, were now brought out into the firelight. Mr. Hemlock and Mayor Thompson stared at the elegant, precise drawings of the shelter they were inside, their faces a mixture of wonder and shame. "It was all here," Hemlock murmured, tracing a diagram of the roof supports with a calloused finger. "All this time, we saw digging. We didn't see the science." When the wind finally died and a pale, watery sun appeared, the world was remade in white. The town was gone, buried under drifts as high as houses. Only the shelter, its entrance now a deep, well-trodden canyon in the snow, was a sign of life. The work of rebuilding began from its doors. It was the town's command center, its hospital, its storehouse. Ilara's folly had become Hemlock's hope. In the years that followed, the town did not just rebuild, it transformed. The lessons of the Great Blizzard were etched into its collective memory. No longer did they build flimsy wooden structures that fought the winter. They began to build with the land, into the land. Under Ilara's quiet guidance, using the knowledge from the journals, they constructed new homes with deep foundations, stone walls, and clever ventilation. The shelter itself was expanded, new chambers carved out by communal effort, becoming a permanent town hall and a winter refuge, a place of safety for travelers, and a storehouse for the entire community in case of emergency. Ilara, the strange girl who dug in the dirt, became their teacher. She never raised her voice, never claimed authority. She simply shared what she knew, her actions always speaking with more power than any words. She and Leo married in a quiet ceremony held in the main chamber of the shelter, their hands joined in the firelight, their bond forged not in courtship, but in shared labor and mutual respect. Time flowed on, measured in the passing of seasons, each one a little less feared than the last. Children who were born after the blizzard grew up hearing the story, looking at the great oak door in the hillside with a sense of reverence. Ilara and Leo raised their own children, teaching them to read the sky, to understand the strength of the earth, and to respect the quiet power of preparation. Decades passed. Boro, who had been a constant, silent presence through it all, grew old. His muzzle turned a soft, dignified gray. His movements became slow and deliberate. He spent his days sleeping by the great hearth, the first piece of the shelter Ilara had ever completed. One autumn evening, as Ilara sat reading the now worn journals, Boro rested his heavy head on her lap. She stroked his soft ears, and he gave a deep, contented sigh, his breathing slowing until it simply stopped. He died as he had lived, peacefully, quietly, and with unwavering trust. Ilara and Leo buried him on the crest of the hill, just above the hidden ventilation shaft, a place where he had often sat to watch her work. They placed a simple fieldstone on the spot, unmarked but known to all. Ilara herself grew old. Her hair turned the color of snow, and her hands, though gnarled with age, were never still. She was the matriarch of the town, its living history. The young people came to her, not for orders, but for wisdom, to listen to her stories of the long work, of the great storm, of a time when the town had doubted. She never spoke of their mockery with bitterness, only with a gentle understanding. "People fear what they don't understand," she would say. "The best answer is not to argue. The best answer is to build something that lasts." When her own time came, it was as peaceful as Boro's. She passed away in her bed in the old cabin, the one that still stood, now quaint and small, in front of the great shelter. The entire valley mourned. They buried her on the hill beside Boro, her grave overlooking the town she had saved. They erected a stone, and on it they carved a simple epitaph, words taken from her own quiet vocabulary. It did not say, "Here lies a hero," or "Here lies a savior." It said, "Ilara, she had a plan." Long after she was gone, the shelter remained. It became the heart of a town that understood its place in the world, a community that had learned to bend with nature instead of breaking against it. Generations came and went, but the great oak door in the hillside stood firm. On the coldest winter nights, when the north wind howled and the snow piled deep against the walls of the world, a thin ribbon of smoke would curl from a hidden chimney on the hill. It was a sign of warmth, of safety, of life. It was the quiet, enduring legacy of the girl who had spent 3 years digging so that her town could spend a lifetime surviving. The structure stood. It always would.